Eric Muathe for the weekend of March 29th and March 30th, 2014. Let's take a look at how we ended Friday with the Dow up 58 points, S&P 500 was up 10 points, and the Nasdaq was up about 8.7. And if we take a look at world markets, we see that generally Europe had a nice up day, and we see that Asia was mixed, with the Hong Kong market being up the most. If we take a look at commodities for Friday's session, we see that crude oil was up about 0.38, natural gas was down about 1%, gold was unchanged, and silver was up slightly. And for the week, we see that the Nasdaq was down 2.83 for the week. The S&P 500 was down slightly, 0.848%, and the Dow was actually positive, surprisingly. So that's how the markets were for the week. What was a volatile session, but the Nasdaq leading the market lower, and we can see the Dow actually managed to close positive for the week. So if we take a look at how the charts look like, we see that we are now back below 41.97, which was this previous weekly closing high here in January of 2014. So we are back below that. We are also back below the 10-week moving average. So the Nasdaq is not looking too sharp. And if you take a look at the weekly, there's a break of this trend line here. This line has been holding the market together. If you go back even as early as late 2012, since this breakout here above the line, and we're finding, so which was about this entry point here, beginning of 2013, it bounced off this entire 2013 rally. Every time we bounced, we had a nice move higher to new highs every time. But we see for the first time, we are breaking below this line here. I know it's confusing, but below this line here is a break. So that tells me that it is not unlikely for this market to go lower. If you take a look at the Nasdaq, you can see that it's in a make or break situation here. This level has been where it's been holding and finding support going back to 2012, December of 2012. Ever since it broke out here, which was this nice entry point here, it's been bouncing off this line. I've been talking about this for a while. Most recently, there was a support here, which was this entry point there. There was support at the line here, which was this entry point. And you can see right now, it does need over the next week, especially to move back above that line like that, so it can confirm that this is yet another buy point for the market. Otherwise, if it cannot bounce, it's going to be the first time it hasn't done so since late 2012. So right here we need a bounce, or this market actually goes lower. If you take a look at the Nasdaq from a 60-minute chart, you see that it's not going to really move higher until it breaks out above the top side on the top lines of the RSI on an hourly basis. So right now, you know, really in no man's land. There's not so much I can read from that chart. And also on the 30-minute chart, you see that the next time the Nasdaq is going to be on fire, it's going to have to break out first and foremost above the top side of the 30-minute chart. I look at the Dow, which was positive for the week slightly. You can see it continues holding above this weekly support line that the Nasdaq broke down. So the Nasdaq broke this support line that the Dow is holding. So the Dow is doing a little bit better on the daily. Really very tough to read what's going on here because we are forming a wedge here like that. And so I don't know which way the market is going to decide to pick, but that's the wedge, and it's hard to tell where the market is wanting to move from that wedge. Also on the 30-minute chart, you'll see the same thing. You got this top side line here being resistance right there, very obvious, and also we have this downside wedge. You can also draw it like that. So the market is in a wedge, and honestly very hard to read what's going on here until it breaks out or breaks down. So this video might not go into too much detail because the market also is trying to decide. And you can see the only way the Dow moves higher if it can break out above the top lines of the RSI there. Okay, and also if we take a look at the 30-minute, which actually I believe is probably the best chart that shows you what's going on. This 30-minute chart for the Dow shows you a lot of inconclusiveness here, or the market is going to have to decide which way it wants to go. There's a trend line on the low side, trend line on the top side on the 30-minute chart. Also the RSI has a wedge forming right there, so we have a wedge in price like that, and we also have a wedge on the RSI. So one way or the other, we are either eventually gonna break out or break down eventually, and so we have to wait for either the price breakout, RSI breakout, or RSI breakdown and price breakdown. Right now, honestly, it's very hard to tell what the market is trying to do. The one thing I can add here is it seems to favor the bulls, just because if you draw a line here, which has been support recently coming from the lows here in February, that line has held for this move here. It also held once we moved above that line there, which was this entry point, and you can see recently we've bounced off that line. So seems to be right now in favor of the bulls, but really they don't take control until they take the market above this declining top line. So really a lot of indecision there. If you take a look at the S&P 500, you'll see that the one thing I can say is we made higher highs with the declining technicals, hence the reason why we've been down the last couple of weeks or so, or at least stalling because of that negative divergence. Okay, and we are still trading above 1842, which is this line here. So and also trading above the 10-week moving average. So unlike the Nasdaq, the Dow and the S&P 500 continue being healthy. You can also see that the S&P 500 continues holding above the weekly support line here. So this one is healthy, but who knows, maybe eventually they all break down just like the Nasdaq, but for now they're holding above that support line, so we have to use that for our analysis. If you take a look at the S&P 500 daily, same scenario here. Seems to be a wedge being formed here, and the market is going to have to decide which way it wants to go. Also on the 30-minute chart, on the 60-minute chart here, you can see similar type formation here. There's a wedge here and another wedge here. So the market is going to decide whether it wants to break out or break down. And also the only way the S&P 500 can rally is if it can break out above this line here, and the only way it can sell off is if it breaks down below that lower lines here. So we are going to have to decide here over the next couple of days, maybe a week or two, whether we want to break out or break down. But right now we are in no man's land as far as the major markets are concerned. Let's take a look at the S&P 500 30-minute chart, which probably looks similar. Again, you see just a wedge here, so no need to continue repeating that. There's a wedge right there. Let's take a look at the Qqq Daily, and you can see here there's decision time to be made. Right here, if you go to this line here, this line has been very critical, very instrumental, and a very good gauge of when to get back in the market. It has held since late 2012, and every time we held on this line, we had a bounce. Every time we had on this time, we had a bounce without fail, every single time. And recently here, which was here. So now we are back in this general area. Are we gonna bounce like we've been doing the last 2 years plus? So right here we have to decide. If we break down for the first time, then that's confirmation that the market has changed. But as of right now, we are trading exactly at the line, so the market is yet to decide which way it wants to go. Now if we take a look at, let's take a look at Apple here in conclusion. I always look at this one before I conclude, and you can see for the week, on a weekly time frame, still remains within this wedge, huge wedge right here for the stock, and it needs to decide which way it wants to go. On the daily for Apple, you can see that it tried to move a little bit, but back at this general level here, connecting the highs and there. So that's really easy resistance there. It needs to break out if it's going to do well. Also, you'll notice that this trend line here if you draw this line like that, there was a break somewhere here to a straight line, and you see that this was a resistance here, perfect time to go short, which was this high. So we've come back and hit that level again. So anything below that is a sell signal, so that became a sell signal. So I'm thinking more than likely this one trends lower. The only way it moves higher is if it can break out, like I said last weekend, the only way this stock does well if it can break out above December or late last year monthly closing highs. It needs to break out above that level there if it's gonna do well. Otherwise, more than likely the dailies are suggesting that the stock has seen a recent high and could pull back. And also we see that on the weekly, lots of indecision here because there's a wedge here that the market is going to have to decide which way it wants to go. So very hard for me to read here, but that's how it looks like. There's no direction here until you get one. So this concludes the free part of the video. The rest of the video, about 50 minutes or so, is for subscribers. Enjoy the weekend. Eric Muade, good luck, peace, and blessings for now. The rest of us, let's continue.